All right. Well, welcome to Pump Up the Volume. It is Tuesday evening. We've had some minor technical, I would say, learning opportunities, and so you may have seen a video. You may have seen a video come in and cut out, but here we are. And so this is the intro. I'd like to welcome today. Well, actually, I'd like to first acknowledge my fellow co-host, Mr. Pat Ford. Pat is the co-founder of the Libertarian Party and also founder of the Coalition Radio Network. Libertarian Party in Rhode Island. Sorry, let me backtrack. But also founder of the Coalition Radio Network that we're streaming through, which has a series of very interesting shows. And so, covering the political spectrum, also several very focused on amplifying the voices of communities like RAMP that too often are not really given enough attention in terms of the amount of great advocacy work that's being done in those areas, but also just general attention around how resources are allocated for vulnerable communities and those that deserve equal access. So I just want to put that plug in for other shows. Please take a look at those shows and the work that other community activists are doing. With that, there's also Mr. Scott Rotunda, our other co-host, cannot be here today, but he sends his best and is continuing to find out very interesting questions to bring to the table. As you know, Scott has a plug into local politics and national politics, and in both his profession as well as just in his work. And independent media always brings a unique lens. So with that, now let's focus on our very special guest. You have seen her before here on Pump Up the Volume, but it has been just amazing to be able to work alongside Ms. Kiah Bryant, not only in the recent efforts around mass vaccinations, but just in mobilizing and organizing around needs for as we kind of push towards equity, right, on all fronts. And so Kiah is the executive director for Direct Action for Rights and Equality. But beyond that role, and just really beyond the organization, is a force and really just brings a level of passion, power, and fire to discussions and how Kiah operates. And so I really want to emphasize that a lot because I want everyone listening today to understand that the conversation we're about to have about what exploitation of community labor is and how it happens here in the state of Rhode Island is coming from a leader that is doing the work, not a leader that is just taking photo ops. We know plenty of those out there, but someone who's doing the work, who's connecting with communities, who's connecting communities with resources, who's fighting to widen opportunity paths and again, to bring equity to the state of Rhode Island. That's the person we have here today, and it is a privilege to have you here, Kiah, so thank you so much.
That was the dopest intro that I've ever had, so thank you. I appreciate that. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, well thanks again. And so I'm gonna, I've kind of led in with what today's topic is, but maybe if we can, and I do want to make sure that I give some space, Kiah, so if you'd like to maybe tell our listeners who don't know you some of the work that you do, some kind of context around even the initiatives that you're currently working on, and then rather than kind of plugging in, if you'd like to lead in to our experience over the last few weeks and why now is an important time to lift up that experience, please feel free to just take us down that journey.
Yeah. So we're a membership grassroots organization that does base building, right? We do policy work, campaigning, and some of the work that we're working on right now is specifically for our Behind the Walls campaign, which is our prison reform or prison abolition committee. We're working on changing 32F, right, or abolishing 32F, which is probation violations for nonviolent offenders. We're also working on what's going on with the ACI and solitary confinement. the COVID restrictions that are at the ACI right now, basically locking people up in their cells for 23, 24 hours out of the day, only giving them about 20 minutes to do anything, whether it's go outside, shower, bathe, eat. It's deplorable. So we're organizing around that a lot. Some of our housing stuff specifically is rent stabilization still. That's something that we're focused on, bringing low income, affordable housing to Providence residents because we are in the middle of a housing shortage. And there are going to be thousands of people who are going to get eviction notices in the next year after this COVID stuff starts to wind down. So that's something that we're really starting to focus our attention towards and making sure that those folks stay in their homes. And the Thrive Agenda, one of our organizers, Terry Wright, who works with the THA committee, she's working with REJC also. And so they've been really pushing the Thrive Agenda right now, which is similar to the Green New Deal. And it's similar to a lot of the abolitionist defunding work that we've been talking about and creating taxes or penalizing harmful businesses who are polluting our areas.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. And if anyone, I just want to put this up front because a lot of times we get to the end of the discussions, and I think the information we bring is at times can be overwhelming, right, to the listeners. And so they may kind of tune out towards the end because they're really just thinking or reflecting on what they've learned. So if someone wants to reach out to you to learn more about the initiatives that you shared, where can they do that? Or how can they do that?
Yeah, so our website is currently under construction, but they can reach me directly. I could put my email address in the chat. I'm always available via email, and I can contact them with one of our organizers if they're specific around housing, environmental justice, the health equity stuff that we're working on, which I didn't even mention, and any of the prison work that we're doing. So I can put my
do you want to give a quick chat, or maybe, and if you want, you could just also say real quick your email, just so that, because the stream may run through different platforms. Yeah,
so it's K Bryant at dare2win.org. So it's K Bryant at DARETOWIN.org.
All right, awesome. So now that everyone knows how to reach you, and hopefully there are listeners that will reach out and support the work and these important initiatives that are taking place, given the looming economic crisis that we haven't even started to feel. I'd love for people to participate. Now let's get to the conversation that needs to be had today, which is, let me kind of preface this by saying, I feel like the last 2 years, and really 2020, the bulk of learning, at least for me, in terms of organizing, took place in 2020. And it was really inspiring, right, to see leaders come together when there was a need. And that need was ultimately just to really reduce harm. I'm being careful and not using things like, save lives, because I know not everyone feels like that was really the case, but to reduce harm, to support communities as best as we could, and to kind of disregard whatever separates us. And most of the time it's not the why, but it's the how, like the nuance of how we want to implement ideas, and just to see people come together, right? Because the why was that important. With that said, like, between the first petition that we ever did around health equity, then moving together onto the Equity Council, the state's Equity Council, and then seeing how difficult it was for anything to happen, then coming together around vaccine equity, the entire time, it's like fighting tooth and nail just to get the state to acknowledge that there's a problem, and rarely to be included in the solution. But when we were included in the solution, and it really took an entire year to get to the point where we were pretty much told, here are the resources, make it happen. and we made it happen, things came to light that even in my experience in organizing and really learning over the last 2 years of how to effectively do that, I hadn't expected. I think we all hear stories, but it's not really real until you're there. And for me, it became real. And what was real is that you had community leaders that are running organizations with staffs of 2 to 3 people, changing operations around to support an effort, possibly risking their own ability to pay rent, their jobs, to try to support a community that should have been supported by the state, and then to see the state respond in a way that wasn't solutions focused, wasn't addressing the exploitation that took place. And so, like, I'd love to get your perspective, right? That's my perspective, but I'd love to get your perspective, Kiah, on like what the journey has been for you, because your journey has been longer than mine in terms of organizing.
Yeah. I'm learning very quickly that the state and their institutions, right, the bureaucracy of their system and how they operate, how they function, is not solutions based, because if they had solutions and if they used those solutions to solve all of our problems, they wouldn't exist anymore, right? We wouldn't need them. And I'm realizing that their systems are designed to put up roadblocks for us and to make things more difficult for us to get work done in the community, or at least to provide security and equity and access to folks in our community. It's not designed for us to be able to function under and prosper under. Their basic standard of communication is rooted in white supremacy. Just taking it a little step back, organizing the event at the Dunkin' Donuts Center for those 2 weekends took a lot of work. Just for myself, it took a lot of work. I was the only person doing that work at my organization. So getting people registered, sending out individual links one at a time, and requests were coming in every 2 minutes, sometimes seconds, right after the other, back to back. And it was stressful and nerve-wracking. It was an infuriating experience, but I knew I was doing good. I knew it was necessary work, because if I didn't do it, who else was going to? Not the state, right? Like, they've already proven that they weren't going to do that work. And just talking about how their standard of communication is rooted in white supremacy, the little bit of work that the work that we did, or the work that I did at least, right, communicating with our members, just putting out a simple flyer on Instagram about what was available, the vaccines that was available the day that the mass vaccination was happening, information about the vaccines, the fact that we were getting hit up almost instantly about that shows me that a little bit of effort goes a long way, and I'm learning that the state and these institutions, any additional work that is not policy driven, I guess, but their policies, they don't want to do it. It's too much for them. They don't even know how to function. It's kind of like their brain just goes haywire, and they just don't understand what we're trying to say, or they're not thinking about the community or our communities and how to communicate with our folks in the way that we do, right? Like, we're so connected to them, and we communicate with them on a regular basis. We meet people where they're at because we understand what it's going to take for them to show up. What we have to do to get them to show up, we got to give. We got to give a little to get them to come. We got to provide the access. We got to provide transportation for them to show up. We got to provide the education for them to show up, for them to get it, for them to understand the importance of it. And that's why I pushed so hard, or that's why I just kept bringing up education, educating our folks on the vaccines, educating our folks on what it means or why it's important to get your second dose, right? Why it's important to even know about what these vaccines are doing to your body. You know, what's going to happen after your first dose? What's going to happen after your second dose? I haven't seen anything put out from the state or Rhode about that information, and it's been requested multiple times, and that hasn't been done. I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, but it's just
is it okay if I like fill in some of the context for anyone who is listening and maybe wasn't even aware that this took place like the whole weekend? Maybe I could do like a quick timeline.
Yeah,
Is that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, March 25th, a group of leaders came together, which in of itself was a testament of around the need to address vaccine equity gap. Essentially, we have a disproportionate risk. You know, Blacks and Latinos have been measured, but we also know that Indigenous and Asian communities fall in that risk pool as well. But they have an increased risk for hospitalizations and deaths for COVID-19. In distributing vaccines, we were seeing more vaccines go to populations after we took care of the nursing homes. We were seeing more vaccines go to populations that were not as high risk as, again, Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian communities in terms of their risk for hospitalization and deaths. And so the question was why? And no one wanted to answer that question. So what we did is we had a press conference that demanded that we do something about it. And interestingly enough, which doesn't always happen, even though Rhode Island politics, you tend to have to make noise for even the possibility of something happening, we were given on April 2nd the go that we could have our, what do you call it? We could have a try at it. And I say that because we weren't given any structure. We were pretty much told, we'll get you some transportation resources like buses. We'll give you FEMA personnel for one day. You figure out what you do with those resources and tell us how we can help. Now, what tell us how we can help really meant was, how do we want to essentially register people? And then we define that process. So as a group, between April 2nd and April 4th, we set up an on-site registration day on Easter Sunday. We had FEMA personnel help that one day. We set up a unique process for registration that no one had done in the entire United States of America. Okay, what we did in Rhode Island, no one has done. It's a community-led approach to primarily focus on racialized communities that are at higher risk for hospitalizations and deaths, and to not only make sure that they're registered, but to go through a 3-step process. Ask them whether they want to register, address any questions that they have, confirm that they're going to register, and within that confirming process, send them a link that only they could use. That is a process that requires more work, but it was the only way to ensure that if we were given 3,000 spots, those spots were essentially allocated to high-risk populations. And for anyone listening that has issues with that, let's be clear, within 2 weeks of that weekend that we were given, that first weekend, 18,000 teachers have been vaccinated over the course of a weekend. And we know that the demographics of that profession is not highly reflective of communities of color. So for anyone wondering whether this was fair or not, it was reasonable, it was fair, and it was about time that this took place. And frankly, it was really too late, in my opinion, because we were working, we could not address, even though we were able to vaccinate, again, confirm, educate, register 4,068 people. That reduced the equity gap by 15%, but we still have a 30% equity gap, a 30% difference between communities that have a lot of people vaccinated versus those that have less people vaccinated. And the ones that have less have a concentration of Black, Latino, Indigenous, and Asian communities. So that is the timeline, right? Like that is when we called for action, when we were told that we can give it a try. The week that it took us as a community of over 60 leaders and organizations and really was 2 weeks to register and to not only set up the registration process, but to get the buses and design a routing system to have buses go from community sites to the vaccination centers. And in that process, as Kiah's been sharing all of this information, the reason I went through that timeline is I want everyone to understand what we're saying. We're saying that in that process, we figured out that communication, education, and capital resources are essential, because without them, those community organizations and leaders are personally burning out, their organizations are being put at risk, and their livelihood and families are being put at risk for a system that historically has disregarded them, but now is asking them to do something that it should have done in the first place.
Yeah. And, you know,
so where do we go from here, Kiah? Like,
man, honestly, I've been racking my brain about that, because on one hand, I know that we have to continue to keep pushing the powers that be to do their jobs, right? We have to keep demanding that they treat us with respect. We have to keep demanding that they give us what we deserve, and that's just access. That's equitable health care. That's not to die, right? Like it's these seem like basic asks, but for some reason, whenever we do request these things or demand them or just say, hey, maybe this would be nice, it's met with a little bit of hostility, or it's brushed off like we don't know what we're talking about. And we prove over and over and over again that we do know our people, we know what we need. We have the solutions, but for some reason we're still consistently left out of the conversation. We're still exploited. We're used for the trust that we have in the communities, those relationships that we work so hard to build, to continue to cultivate and to educate, right? Like, that's work that we've put in over time. That's not something this is not a day's worth of work. Like, we've put that work in. And if the state was intentional about their care for their BIPOC residents, they would do the same. But the fact that we had the data about the health inequities, we had the data about the disparities between our communities and white folks here in the state last year, we got that data around this COVID virus. Why are we not being proactive? Why are we not making sure that these communities are being taken care of, especially since they're the most marginalized? They're the ones that are harmed by this virus the most. Why is it that we have to get up there and do a press conference to get them to do what they're supposed to do, what they should have done from the beginning? It just didn't make any sense to me. And I'm learning again that any bit of extra work, anything that pertains to connecting with people, poor people, people of color, Black folks, on a human level, is just incomprehensible. Like, it is not something that crosses the minds of the folks who work inside these institutions, and it's harmful. So yeah, I don't know where we go. I don't know where we go from here. I mean, our communities need to continue to keep banding together. We need to figure out ways to work out our differences, put the sexist crap aside, put the ageist stuff aside, put your ego aside, because that was a problem. It's not about
do you want to share
one.
Do you want to share more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that I was the youngest person on the call, or one of the youngest person that's doing this work, the youngest director or whatever, but there were folks who were a lot older than a lot of us, who took up a lot of space, who were incredibly sexist and just dismissive of accountability, dismissive of our feelings, dismissive of what what we feel our community needs, what we demand, instead of giving Rhode a pass for, I guess, throwing these resources at us that we knew they had, but whatever. We need to hold them accountable. We need to hold them to a standard that puts us at equal footing with the rest of their constituency. We need to continue to push and demand better. And it seems like folks that we were working with in this coalition, I guess you would call it, were just interested in themselves, interested in their own agenda, not truly about the community, not truly about making sure that our folks got the best healthcare that they could get, in a sense, right? Where that it's fully holistic to them and their needs and what's going to make them feel safe and what makes them feel comfortable about getting this virus or getting this vaccine, because we know our communities still have trust issues around them. But
Do you think it was
okay?
So we had over 60 people helping, right? It seemed like there was a lot of what was interesting to me is many of them were not given space to speak, but they were doing the groundwork with us.
They weren't.
Right?
Yeah.
But they were doing the work with us, and it was really like a small, number. Less than like a handful that were taking up most of the space.
There were 60 people on the call, right? There were like 60 people doing this work, a part of this coalition, but there may have been 10 of us that were actually doing the work. And then there were like a group of folks who were really just interested in shaking some hands, taking pictures, talking to the media about what a great job they're doing when they're not doing anything. They show up for a few minutes to the site, walk around. Even the governor, like when he showed up the first day, what day was that, the 10th? Yeah, when he showed up on the 10th and out in the observation area in the dump where people are waiting their 15 minutes, he kind of just glided around the observation area like he was, I'm gonna be very like visual or speaking analogies or whatever, but he seemed like he was a king just kind of looking at his subjects. And he had like his posse behind him, and he was talking with the FEMA workers and talking with the military personnel. There was no engagement with any of the community volunteers. There was no acknowledgement of the community volunteers even. There was no thank you, and not that I'm looking for a thank you, but it would have been freaking nice, right? Like it would have been nice to be acknowledged for doing your work, right? And getting these people together, because we pulled 4,000 people showing up. That's a lot. And the short amount of time that we had to pull that together is amazing that we were able to accomplish that. And I guess shrinking that disparity, however much we were able to do that, was huge. And that's a win for us. And I truly don't even believe that the State House or Rhode or whoever thought we were going to get that done. I don't know. I said a lot, but
yeah. No, it's true. You wonder, right? There were some. We had some champions internally, but they can only do so much before they risk their jobs, and as we know, not everyone's willing to do that.
Yeah, and when I speak of when I speak of like Rhode, it's more so like as a whole. There were some folks individually who did the best that they could, but obviously it's a system, and if their hands are tied, their hands are tied.
Right. So I 100% agree. And like, you know, based on basically like, it's interesting to me that it seemed like this idea is that we were gifted this opportunity. But
Yes.
let's acknowledge that
Yes.
by the first Wednesday, we had registered about 15. We had sent out over 1,500 links, about 2,300 links total. 1,500 people have been registered, and someone presses a computer system, a button on the software system, and then all those people get their appointments canceled. It becomes a story. There's going to be an investigation. No answers, and and so to your point though, like that's Wednesday. Saturday, you're in the observation area, in an area where they didn't have enough translators in FEMA. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they did not have like interpreters. They did not have interpreters
Yeah.
supporting multiple languages at the time. And community members
And one of
go
the
in and
FEMA
do their
workers,
best. Yeah.
yeah, and one of the FEMA workers referred to a group of Asian men as Oriental. So like that's the type of shit that we're dealing with. You know, and I haven't even heard someone be called Oriental in a really long time. So if that's where this dude's mind is at, that's a problem. And he was like their team leader down there. So yeah, that's weird and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dissect, right? And but the key is if you have someone walking through that observation area. I mean, Frank, let's talk about. I mean, the current governor does not fully understand the difference between equality and equity. First off, so we can start there. Not my words, his own words in a press conference on the 25th of March. But the second piece of this is there was this like photo op moment the first Saturday. Everyone's taking photo ops. Older men are getting the spotlight, leaving everyone else, and let's be honest, leaving women of color away from the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and yet when you look at the organizations that are doing the work and run, it is, I mean, there's a greater proportion of women of color leaving the organizations. And
Yeah.
somehow or other, they were asked to do the work, but they were not put up front in the spotlight. And when I say
They never
spotlight, let's be
are.
clear here. I'm talking about, yeah, and I'm talking about putting others in front of the camera so that you can talk about the work you're doing. This isn't just about like a photo op. This is about elevating the work.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
It's
Space
just
is yours.
I had said this before, and it's not enough to parade around a bunch of black and brown bodies in front of the Dunkin' Donuts Center and say, come on in, come get vaccinated because people like you are here and we're co-signing for this thing, right? Like it's not enough for us to do that work. And it actually is an insult to all of us for that to continue to keep happening. You know, it's an insult to us for them to even consider doing that to us, you know, using us as, so what did they call us? The BIPOC representatives, and which is disgusting.
Yeah, they kept saying your people.
Right. So, and yeah, I yes, they are my people, but at the same time, they should be yours, right? Like they should be yours. They're a part of this community. You're tasked with the responsibility of making sure that these people are safe. And if you don't see yourself as part of that community, that's a problem straight away. If you can't speak on behalf of BIPOC folks, knowing that they're being harmed in some way, knowing that they're not getting access to things that they need to keep themselves safe, that's a problem. You can't speak on that. You don't know the difference between inequality or equality and equity. That's a problem. You know, I think with this current governor, this was a chance for him to make a name for himself or whatever, because he had been so silent on COVID all of last year, right? So this is his one chance, his opportunity to really speak on it and to show that he's doing something and that he can kind of one up Gina in some way. I don't really know, but it was a show, and I didn't like the circus that I was a part of. Like the work, what we were able to accomplish was great, but being a tool in this, I didn't like. I didn't appreciate it whatsoever, especially since I wasn't compensated for it at all.
So, I want to make sure we spend the last 7 minutes definitely focusing on this upcoming weekend and on like next steps in terms of, and this is not something that's going to end in this conversation. It's going to continue, but what should the requirements be for having a community-led effort of any sort, in terms of resources for those community organizations beyond the dependency on federal grants, which are limited, and where many organizations may not have grant writers. The state, we can talk about that anyway. That's the framework. But Pat, you've been on the screen. I 100% appreciate that you've been giving this space. I do want to. I do want to try to build a bridge between what's been shared and what your insights are. So you're from Cumberland.
Yep.
The governor, Dan McKee's from Cumberland.
He is.
Is equity has it ever been a part of the conversation in Cumberland? I mean, what's the track record here?
Well, first of all, Cumberland does have a community that's firmly representing the BIPOC community at large. It is not a large community, and unfortunately, I have yet to see it assert itself really in municipal affairs. There's across the Blackstone Valley, and it's interesting because former Mayor Diasa Central Falls was involved in this, but there is a largely white, largely establishment. Largely, we do things this way because this is how we've always done them this way, what I call Blackstone Valley boys. And at its peak, it includes, of course, Don Grebian, who is no friend to the BIPOC community. Asked in the next show, we're going to have folks in from the Pawtucket community to talk about the central issues facing them. They've been largely excluded. Pawtucket has been hell-bent to incorporate gentrification into its business plan for years, with, ironically, on the backs of Pawtucket taxpayers. That's another show, another conversation. But across the Blackstone Valley, you had this sort of male-dominated, white-dominated political structure who are uniquely out of tune with the needs of a significant and growing part of their very own communities. And so, no, there's been very little or none of that in Cumberland whatsoever, or nor would I argue there's enough of it in Woonsocket or North Providence or Pawtucket or any of the other cities, Central Falls notwithstanding. Central Falls organically, through the hard work of its citizens, let's emphasize citizens, and by that I mean anyone who lives in the, if you will, the environs of Central Falls, who have managed to build up some economic growth despite the best efforts of government. So in general, if I were to give it the entire Blackstone Valley report card, it would probably be a D, not just Cumberland. And I have ideas on how to change that, but that's, it's tough, buddy. To both of you, I consider you pals, and it's a tough road to go across a significant part of Rhode Island, because largely you have the same crew that's dominated the failed politics of Rhode Island now for a generation, and I mean a full generation. Not a healthy situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to plow a field, but someone has to do it. So, so here's when we talk about what that means and the labor that it takes, just to take that metaphor and apply it to what we've been talking about. And Pat, we can leave this part of the conversation for another, because I know that I know that from a libertarian perspective, this conversation might totally shift outside the scope of what we're talking about here. But person who exerts a certain labor should have compensation that's reasonable, right?
Absolutely.
To the labor that they're expending. And in this case, it's not, I would even build that further out and say that it's not only a labor, but also a risk that's being incurred, because community organizations and leaders are taking risk with their personal lives, with the ongoing efforts and work that they're doing, which in a staff of 3 can be completely disrupted, right?
Right.
I mean, can be negatively impacted for months if you let something sit for 1 or 2 weeks and you miss a grant deadline, just to put it in a very clear example. So like, for the labor, for the risk incurred, but for the value gained, the value of capturing cultural nuance, of capturing, from a communication standpoint, how to actually address some of these health issues, frankly, how to address equity. I mean, one of the funniest things I saw was that we were trying on the community side just to inform people that if you were Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, you can get vaccinated. And the state's pushing out these flyers that are talking about equity-focused weekend, which for English speakers like the governor, it may be hard to understand equity, the word. And so how do you even translate that and address the understanding of equity versus equality versus just tackling the immediate need and allowing a community-led effort to do that? So the value gained, from my perspective, is obvious, but the risk incurred and the labor provided, if it continues to go uncompensated, we have to call it what it is: exploitation. And that is not a way to heal. So for anyone wearing purple ties out there saying that all the divisions are gonna, somehow dissipate or disappear, like, that is not the way that we heal. So what are steps that should be taken, Kiah? If you had like 1 to 3 steps, and I'll give you a range just in case I don't want to like force you into 3, but if you had 1 to 3 steps that the state should take tomorrow, what would they be?
I would say giving out grants or contracting out to these grassroots organizations who they expect and look to do their outreach, to do that community organizing, to do the work of the whatever community initiative that they're trying to have, or if we're trying to reach a certain group of folks and we're expected to do the work, they need to compensate us for that, most definitely. And we shouldn't have to go through an RFP process or whatever it is. Our track record should speak for itself.
Can I jump in with a quick question here? Terry spoke very eloquently at the meeting on Saturday, and I didn't have a chance, so I just wanted to thank you all for your hospitality.
Terry's amazing.
And for being able to be there. And she spoke very eloquently about a process that DARE was competitive in for essentially providing referral services, counseling services, if you will, for folks who were looking for different types of federal funding as a result of the pandemic. My takeaway from a conversation that we kind of just a general conversation about it was that a number of the winners of that contract were what I would call, this is my words, not anyone else's, what I call the usual suspects. And by that, I mean big, if you will, commerce, big chamber, big organization. And I was appalled because, I've gotten over the last couple of years to understand your mission and the long-term nature of your organization, the amount of inroads you have. I mean, I shouldn't even say inroads. You are part of the community. You're a fabric of the community. And you've got quite a history of service to the community with distinction, without controversy, if you will. Occasionally politically you've gotten very loud, and it's been, I think, well taken and well appreciated by a lot of us. And yet your organization wasn't chosen for that role. And I find that to be disturbing. And because... Go ahead, buddy.
I agree. It's disturbing because we work closely with this organization. And they were sending people to us to help pay the rent or mortgages for folks. And we told them that we were already doing this work. We were already helping people with their application processes for the rent relief programs, because there was a need that nobody was filling. Nobody was helping them. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know how to fill it out. And no matter how many times we've told them that they need to change their application, they don't care. So we had to do that work. We had to do it, and that's fine. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But at the same time, if you're offering, or if there's money out there to pay organizations, why not pay the organizations that are already doing the work and was doing the work prior to y'all getting the money?
Right.
And are continue to do that work.
Exactly. In fact,
it just doesn't make sense.
I'd be hard pressed to think of an organization better suited to do that work in your community, than you.
Yeah.
Just forget about the optics.
Everybody is coming to us.
Right. I mean, forget about the optics, forget about all of that for just a second. Let's just put that aside for a second. Who would be the organization best qualified with the longest track record of high performance for support to the community in what I'll call South Central Providence than, Direct Action for Rights and Equality? It's not even close in my book.
That's what I'm saying.
So to deny to that should have been, and I'm not here to make anybody feel bad, but that should have been sort of a layup, because at the same time, to whatever funding you receive to do that would be clearly invested directly in the community.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Right. We had plans, we were going to pay some of our members to help with those applications. So that's putting money back into the community's pockets.
Exactly.
I don't understand. It's just the mindset of these people. It just doesn't, the math isn't mathing, and it's aggravating.
Right. And I just want, on closing, there's a lot of folks, and I'm just not going to name names, but there's a lot of folks in these organizations that are compensated at a very high level, all right, to quote unquote help people, and that money, instead of going into organizations that, like yours, have a demonstrated capacity for high performance community work at extremely low cost, while simultaneously being untouched by scandal or quite frankly some of the baggage that these larger organizations have, is stunning to me. I look upon those as missed opportunities. I just want to mention that the president of Crossroads, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not out of bounds here, but according to the most recent publicly available 990, which is a federal tax return for nonprofits, the president of Crossroads makes just under $200,000 a year. Holy cow! You can make a lot of money helping disadvantaged folks.
I didn't think so, but apparently,
and that was from 2018.
So let's also let's also just acknowledge that what we see and this is where we might agree a little, Pat, but what we see in government is we see the criteria and the filtering systems are set up to explain away quality and to say we have a pretty much a quality assurance process here that somehow then protects the state from liability, but that's where it ends. As operators, the state doesn't really hold itself accountable for whether the organizations that get this money, and when organizations, we're talking about nonprofits, but we can talk about IGT now too, which now wants a 20-year no-bid contract, which is ridiculous. But at the end of the day, that's the way that state government of Rhode Island has operated. It creates these filtering systems, does not acknowledge how oppressive those filtering systems are and how reflective of every other institutional systemic racism, right? How insidious it is. But beyond that, it then just removes itself entirely. And what we're calling, one of the things you called for, Kiah, and I think it's really important to highlight here is, there should not, if you're going to give a private entity or multiple entities a 20-year no bid contract because you can justify creating jobs, then why can't you make a process easier to give community organizations money when they're going to literally save lives, when they're going to keep roofs over people's heads, they're going to keep food on people's plates? It makes absolutely
That's not their concern.
no sense.
That's not their concern, and that's what that's hard to realize, but they're not thinking that way. It's profit driven. It's whatever it is to boost the economy. It's disgusting. That's just what it is.
Well, the double standard needs to end, right? It needs to end. And the reason that we're having, Kiah, and I appreciate you coming on, and I know that you spent more time than you had planned with us. I really appreciate your sharing the space, and I hope that you feel like you had enough space. I do apologize for taking more than I even planned to take. And moving forward, this is, I like to say it's the beginning, but it's not. So we're somewhere in the middle. But frankly, we need to push for an ending that's actually going to be positive and different from what we've seen in the past. And so over the next week, for anyone listening, we are not only going to continue to press on this issue, we're also going to continue to support communities this upcoming weekend. So if you'd like to volunteer, please email Kiah, and then I'll be working with Kiah and other community leaders to build up our volunteers for this upcoming weekend as we continue to work on vaccine equity. So essentially this would be you're working with us on site at the Dunkin' Donuts Center. We are looking for individuals that do have between 4 and 8 hours on Saturday and Sunday. If you only have 4, that's very helpful. In addition to that, when I say pressing on this issue and continuing to do the work, there is more work to do. So Kiah did mention the Thrive agenda, this need to address health justice, right? Within health justice, you have a health equity, but also just racial justice, also environmental justice. There's so many legislative policies that are up on the table, from addressing minimum wage to taxing the rich, to really making sure that organizations, institutions like LaSalle Academy pay their fair share. And frankly, on a bigger level, Brown University should be paying taxes. I just wanted to give that plug in. So please just, join us on Saturday. We'll have these conversations as we're doing the work, but it is important to build momentum, right? To power a level of progress that actually positively impacts the communities that have been historically disenfranchised. So rather than pushing ideas out there into the ether and not seeing anything take effect, please join us in doing the work. And, I'm 100% confident that we're going to see some change. So Kiah, with that, I'd love to give you the last few words, any plug, anything that, you want to mention, please.
Donate to DARE if you want to support our work. We have our THA meetings every Tuesday. We actually changed the time from 5 to 7 p.m. We have our behind the wall meetings that meets every Wednesday from 6 to 8 in person and virtual. You can contact one of our organizers, Manusha or Terry, through Facebook or Instagram, or just through me if you want to, so I can get you in contact with them. We also have our Rhode Island Solidarity Fund that we're actually going to do a small fundraiser for. Our 1-year anniversary of the Solidarity Fund is coming up soon. So that's the mutual aid work that we've done, collaborating with 5 other organizations like ours in Rhode Island through the COVID stuff. Thank you so much. This has been great. I appreciate the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it was wonderful. We're looking forward to having you back. And Pat, thank you so much for giving us
For
the
being-
space and
For being quiet.
for not pulling
Yeah,
us
thank
into
you, Pat.
like not
Being so
pulling us
patient.
into like a contentious debate.
Yeah, the doctor and I are sort of like the frickin' frack of, if you will, of political conversations. Ordinary innocent people have stood on the sidelines horrified as we spend seemingly days arguing over economics and, well, you name it. Well,
I appreciate you giving me the time.
No, Kiah, I really enjoy having you here. And again, thanks to your organization's hospitality on Saturday. And, the doors here obviously is open to you anytime you'd like to join us.
Awesome. Y'all have a good night.
All right, awesome. Well, everyone listening, everyone have a great evening, and thank you again for joining us on Pump Up the Volume. We'll see you next week, where we're going to continue to amplify the voices of communities. So take care, be safe, and see you next week.